Hello and welcome back and thank you for staying for the final panel tonight. We've had a great time so far, and you can continue the conversations that you started on Discord and catch up on all of the panel presentations that you might have missed on our YouTube channel. Thank you again to all of our presenters, moderators, and production managers who have made this event successful. Before getting on to the last presentation of the night, I wanted to let everyone know that NavyCon also has a podcast. It's called The Joint Geeks of Staff, and its season 2 will be coming out later this year. Also, it's never too early to start thinking about the next NavyCon, so I'd like to encourage everyone here tonight to start thinking of a presentation they'd like to give at our next gathering. Hopefully that will be in person. All right, so finally, I'd like to introduce Steve Leonard. You may know him as Doctrine Man from Twitter and comic strips, but Steve has had an incredible career beyond social media and his drawings. He's the author for a weekly column called Point of Departure, the co-founder of Divergent Options and the Military Writers Guild, as well as a member of the Arthur D. Simon Center's Interagency Journal Editorial Review Board. He's a graduate of SAMS and led the team that wrote the Army's first Stability Operations Doctrine. He's written or co-written 5 books, countless articles and columns, and he's assembled some of the team behind his latest effort called To Boldly Go, Leadership Strategy and Conflict in the 21st Century and Beyond, which is available for pre-order now and from all the finest booksellers in September. Everyone here, Steve Leonard. Steve, take it away.
Hey, Corey, thanks for having us tonight. Really glad to be here. I'd like to take a few minutes and first of all, thank everybody for joining us tonight. It's late and some of us are probably already up way past our bedtimes, including me. But before we introduce the panel, I'd like to take a few minutes and kind of set the context for what we're going to discuss. Our panel tonight serves a couple of purposes. One, we're going to introduce the audience to our forthcoming anthology that you mentioned, To Boldly Go, Leadership, Strategy, and Conflict in the 21st Century and Beyond, which will be published by Casemate Books on October 7th. Corey was kind enough to offer us an opportunity to share with you what we were trying to do with the book and to give you an opportunity to speak to some of the writers on the project, to let them tell their stories and to relate what they were doing and kind of dig into the various pieces of science fiction that they used to drive their particular portions. 2, in the process of talking about the book, we're going to explore what's been called the literature of ideas. So when Pamela Sargent used those words to describe sci-fi in 1975, the genre had already exploded into the literary mainstream, onto our TV screens, and into movie theaters. In 1975, I was still running home from school so I could watch Star Trek reruns on TV on the 3rd channel that we got. It was that big of a deal. As the literature of ideas, science fiction has proven to be a powerful metaphor for the world around us. It offers us a rich tapestry of imagination through which to explore how we lead, how we think, and how we interact with one another. So with To Boldly Go, we assembled a team of more than 30 writers from around the world, literally, experts in leadership and strategy, senior policy advisors and analysts, professional educators and innovators, experienced storytellers, and ground-level military leaders to help us better understand ourselves through the lens of science fiction. So each chapter of To Boldly Go brings to light the lessons that we can glean from science fiction, drawing on a classic example of the genre in ways that are equally relatable and entertaining. That whole common language piece that we can understand better what we're discussing if we do it through a common medium like science fiction really has a powerful use here. For example, you'll see a chapter on the burdens of leadership by Ghost Fleet author August Cole, where he launches readers into the cosmos with Captain Avatar aboard the space battleship Yamato. In another chapter, we look at the Battle of the Mutara Nebula from the Wrath of Khan to weigh the advantages of experience over intellect in the pursuit of strategy. You get into things like, what does interspecies conflict in science fiction tell us about our perspectives on social Darwinism? Whether using Star Trek Deep Space Nine to explore the nuances of maritime strategy or The Expanse to better understand the threat posed by depleted natural resources, To Boldly Go provides thoughtful essays from a terrific group of writers on relevant subjects that will appeal to business leaders, military professionals, and, like us, fans of science fiction. But you didn't come here to listen to me. At least I hope not. If you did, you're going to be disappointed. Tonight, we're going to be joined by 4 of the book's premier writers, each representing a different focus and perspective from the vast world of science fiction, who will share with you their insights, lessons, and motivations through To Boldly Go. The book, as well as our panel, offers readers and audiences an opportunity to focus their minds and explore the mental laboratory that science fiction affords. To borrow a phrase from my absolute favorite television host, this book and the panel discussion it fostered offers readers a rare chance to take a journey into a wondrous land of imagination. Now, you might also notice that the panel tonight is bringing something a little different to the mix. In the spirit of a true con, everybody here is in full cosplay. As Corey likes to say, if you're in, you might as well be all in. Well, guess what? We're all in tonight. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our panel for To Boldly Go. First of all, we've got Erica Iverson, call sign Fargo. She is a U.S. Army strategist with a diverse range of strategic career assignments spanning the globe in Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. A South Dakota native, yes, I know Fargo's not in South Dakota, she received a master's degree in professional studies from George Washington University and a Bachelor of Arts in English from Creighton University. She is currently serving as the Chief of Strategy and Innovation for the Army Enterprise Marketing Organization in Chicago, which is something we'll get to talk about later, I think. Jonathan Klug, affectionately known as Klugzilla. John is the co-editor, co-author, and longtime battle buddy of mine, as well as a professor at the U.S. Army War College, military strategist, and historian. He's also a PhD candidate in military and naval history at the University of New Brunswick. Yeah, it's in Canada, eh? He is an award-winning military history instructor and taught at both the U.S. Air Force Academy and the Naval Academies. Kira Puff Rolson is a United States Air Force officer, strategist, and world-renowned buff driver, and reportedly a character prototype for more than one of the Dan Brown novels. I don't know if that's true, but that's what she says. She has a broad range of experience from tactical to strategic levels of planning across multiple regions of the world. She holds graduate degrees in intelligence, military operational art and science, and military strategy. Her professional writing has been featured on the Over the Horizon Journal, Angry Staff Officer blog, and Business Insider. She is also a fiction novelist under a pen name that is probably the worst kept secret in the Department of Defense. And last but not least, Major General Mick Ryan, who contributed the book's foreword and one chapter. He is an Australian Army officer. As if you can't tell, he's in uniform. A combat engineer by trade, he has commanded tactical units at the troop, squadron, regiment, task force, and brigade levels. He is a veteran of East Timor, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and served on the PAC-AF coordination cell on the U.S. Joint Staff. A distinguished graduate of Johns Hopkins University and the U.S. Marine Corps Staff College and School of Advanced Warfare, he is an enthusiastic writer, reader, and a passionate advocate of professional education and lifelong learning. However, like most general officers, he's also a little busy and will have to pull chocks a little early. So make sure that you have your questions queued up because he'll turn into the Australian version of a pumpkin at around 22:30. All right. Now that you've met your distinguished panel, let's To Boldly Go. And let's hit the first person I want to ask a question to is you, Mick. So the idea of writing a book that uses science fiction as a metaphor for learning is something that you and I discussed over a particularly bad dinner at West Point in 2018. In fact, if I remember right, it was your idea. Can you talk to the idea, where it came from, and why it was important to you, and what ultimately did you think we could accomplish with this?
Well, hello there. I've always wanted to say that. Thanks, Steve, and thanks to the organisers of NavyCon for inviting me back again this year. It's a real pleasure to be part of this terrific activity. I can't claim that I originated the idea for this. In fact, it came out of a lunch I had a little bit before that conference at West Point with a mentor of mine and a professor, Elliot Cohen at Johns Hopkins, and I had been recommending to him that he read science fiction, and he was starting to take notes on what books. And then he just said to me, "You should write a book on this." And it only really crystallized when Steve and I were talking up at West Point at the dinner before the conference for Modern War Institute. And I guess the back and forth then really between the two of us, we decided, well, there's something to this. There's a whole bunch of people out there that are writing or capable of writing and have important, interesting things to say about our profession. So let's get into it. But I might have been partially part of the idea, but really John and Steve have been the real driving forces behind this book.
So ultimately, what did you think we could do with this book? That's the big question that comes to mind most often.
Yeah, I mean, I think these books are really important. It gives people a voice who may not always have a voice in military institution, because that dense hierarchical strata that we exist in at various points in our career. But a really important thing is it allows people to be creative and imaginative about the future of our profession. Just because you've been in our profession for a short time doesn't mean you don't have good ideas about it. And indeed, the generation of people coming through I see at the moment around the 05 and junior are fabulously, talented, dedicated to our profession, but also, unlike my generation, more technologically literate. And they can use all those things in fiction in a way you can't sometimes use it in your day-to-day responsibilities. So, in essence, it's about giving lots of people with different views a voice, and to ensure everyone in our profession has the opportunity to have their say about its future.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Kira, I've got a question for you. You've been one of the most vocal advocates of this project from the outset. So what drew you to the book in the first place, and what does it mean to you personally?
Great question. So I think the thing that I love about this project is really, I think it gives you a chance to get to the heart of some issues. So currently leading, and I've noticed among peers, subordinates, even sometimes among leaders, there are certain topics, words, phrases that if you start bringing them up, it turns people's brains off. Like they're burnt out on the topic, they disagree with the premise, or they've heard a phrase so many times that it's lost its meaning. The thing that I use to illustrate this usually is I can say think outside the box, or I can say think outside the triangle. The first one you've heard so many times, you've heard think outside the box so many times, it's just lost all meaning. Like it's just noise. But if I tell you think outside the triangle, you have that half-second pause where you have to think through it. What was the meaning of that? What am I actually doing? And so in cases like this, where like think outside the box is so overused, I like to find that better common ground to start from. And Star Wars is fantastic. Sci-fi is fantastic. Star Trek, all fantastic things, because they are all so pervasive in current culture. That you can pick a scene, a story, one of those points to start from. And even if somebody's never seen the movie, they've never read the book, they're so pervasive in culture that it feels comfortable and it feels familiar to the person you're having a conversation with. And you can use that to then gently walk them into this argument. And so that the one that I like to start with, and I think really is where my chapter comes up with, I can talk to you about Chewbacca being a sharpshooter and that he'd be a fantastic X-Wing pilot, but they didn't have Wookiees in mind, so he doesn't fit. But if I tried to talk to you about, hey, we have a problem of 60% of the women that are trying to go through a certain aviation training pipeline don't fit inside the cockpit, they're too short, and it precludes them from going on to fighters and bombers. You might sign that off as just a women's issue, a feminist point of view, a feminist perspective. But if I start with Chewbacca and I sort of walk you down that argument, making a parallel argument, I can bring somebody there. And so that's what I like about this book, is that there's so many ways to make so many interesting, unique arguments on important topics that don't automatically cause somebody's brain to turn off.
That's something that I think we've tried to talk about from the beginning too, is that the science fiction gives us that common thread that we can pull on, and the more familiar people are with Star Trek or Star Wars or Battlestar Galactica, then you can start to draw those parallels and have meaningful conversations, all using one of those shows as a backdrop and establish that common ground. So I've really enjoyed that. John, I got a question for you. Early on, when we first started to talk this idea, you made some comparisons to what we were doing in the Ray Bradbury theater. So much so that Bradbury is a major theme in the book's introduction. Can you talk to what you saw there and why it meant so much to you and how it's relevant to the book? John, I think you might be muted. We're going to let John drop out and then re-enter StreamYard real quick so he resets. Erica, let's move on real quick. This is not our first book project together, if I remember right. I think it's our third. And as I looked back and did some thinking before we started, I thought, well, why does this keep happening? And what draws you to this subject matter? What is it about science fiction and fantasy that keeps you coming back for more?
Steve, can you hear me? No, I can't hear you.
I can hear you. I can't hear Erica.
Okay. So who's go since I dropped out?
Well, we're waiting for Erica to answer a question, but I think we're going to have Erica drop out of StreamYard and come back while you answer the question I asked you.
Okay.
So it's complicated ballet that we're doing, but it'll work. Okay, go ahead, John.
Yeah, no, to go back to the question about Bradbury, I think it starts with some of your opening comments on science fiction entering the mainstream of literature. And Ray Bradbury was one of the iconic authors of science fiction. And when he passed, the New York Times talked about how he was the writer most responsible for bringing modern science fiction into the literary mainstream. So that always comes to my mind. The other thing is the Ray Bradbury Theater. You know, it was kind of mid 80s, and you know, I'm a child of the 70s and 80s. So I remember him, the opening where he would walk in and he was dark and shadowy, and he would turn on lamps and you would see his office, and there was pictures and magazines and books and knickknacks. And I think the knickknacks are what caught my eye the most. He had a model of the Nautilus from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the Disney version. And I just remember that. And I can hear his voice like you would hear Morgan Freeman's voice or anyone else's if they were doing dialogue. And he'd said, "I'm surrounded on every side by my magician's toy shop. I'll never starve here. I just look around, find what I need, and begin." And that has always resonated with me. You know, a great TV intro or movie intro like The $6 Million Man. I mean, you can hear the words right now, and I don't have to do that for you. But Bradbury, he tied into so many literary things. You know, Something Wicked This Way always comes to mind, and The Martian Chronicles. But I had a teacher, English teacher, one time talk about how he wrote the 1956 screenplay for Moby Dick. And when he told me that in high school, the wheels were turning, and I said, "That's Khan. That's where all that dialogue came from." So to see how it all ties together, how it all builds upon it, I think was just really fascinating. And that magician's toy shop, the creativity, that whole angle, that really inspired me when we started to talk about this project.
And the whole idea of the magician's toy shop appeals to me because I surround myself with toys all day long. Whether you're talking about Rocket over here in the corner, or the Avengers, or Iron Man over here, I live in a magician's toy shop. So that metaphor really stuck with me when we first started to discuss it. Erica, now I think you're actually back now, right? Oh God, tell me you can talk. Are you muted again? Yeah, nobody can hear you. All right. So with that happy note, I think we're going to go back to Australia really quickly and talk to Mick about your contribution to the book. You used the Old Man's War to kind of dig deep into your subject matter. Tell us about your chapter and what made that universe so relevant to you.
I guess, firstly, I love John Scalzi as an author, and along with Martha Wells and K.R. Paul, he's one of my top 3 favourite authors at the moment. And the thing about the book is it's part of a series, and it kind of elevates its thinking from the tactical all the way to the grand strategic as it moves through the series. So that's attractive to me, because as professionals, you grow through your career to think more broadly and deeply. And the book kind of is illustrative of that professional journey that we all go on. But I'm very attracted to how Peter Singer talks about the use of fiction. It's like blending up vegetables and putting them in your kids' milkshakes. You learn things you're not even expecting to learn, and you enjoy yourself while you do it. And for me, the 4 key themes I wanted to look at, because they're contemporary and future oriented. First one was, why does strategy matter? I think in some respects we've lived through a couple of decades where strategy has kind of taken a little bit of a backseat, and it needs to reassert itself in the 21st century strategic competition that we find ourselves in. The second theme was about civil-military relations. There's some really powerful ideas about the relationship between military and the people they serve, and I think it's a very relevant topic, particularly now, but is always of some relevance. Third, I wanted to look at the basis of ethical strategy. You can't just have strategies. They need to be ethical and aligned with the desires of the people we serve, and should serve something larger than a military or national security outcome. They should serve building more prosperous, open and free societies. And fourth, and finally, I wanted to look at the ethical application of technologies. And in the Old Man's War, if you've read it, the biotechnology is a very powerful theme almost right from the get-go, but also lots of other technologies, stealing technologies, using alien technologies. I thought there were some good lessons in there for it. So all up, I think the Old Man's War book and the series provides a lot of useful stuff that we as professionals consider about the future of our profession. And hopefully for many people, it is the blended up veggies in their professional milkshake.
I got to tell you, the whole vegetables in the milkshake thing just completely threw me. I think I was a teenager before I knew that people didn't put vegetables in their Jell-O, other than my mother. I thought everybody had peas and carrots and things like that in their Jell-O. And, the first time I ever saw just plain Jell-O. So thanks for that, Mick. I'm not going to get over that one for a while. All right, Erica, let's try this one more time. God, I thought you hung up on us for a minute. So what is it about science fiction and fantasy that keeps you coming back for more?
Okay, well, sound check. Thumbs up. Okay, sorry about that. We guess that expensive headset didn't work after all. So original question, Steve, 3 books. I mean, some could argue that the common thread is you. That's a good draw, right? The name, it's a brand itself. I really think science fiction is this extended reality, like those choose your own adventure books we had growing up. And I've always really enjoyed that, because it gives that fantasy part where you can really have this, you can choose your reality and you can choose what genre you want. So I like the good guys type. And I think on deployments, I think some could argue that it was that escape. And I think that's where I really found the escape in sci-fi, probably on like my second deployment. We went through different versions of things, and then the sci-fi started to come out. And I found that was really more of the outlet that we needed. And that's what going into the first book that we did, the Strategy Strikes Back with Star Wars, it really pushes social change. And I really appreciate that about this genre. And I think going back to the reason why I picked what I did in that book, I was, if you think about when I was born and, just a couple of years ago, when episode 4, so A New Hope, Star Wars was released, Princess Leia, if you really think about that episode, there was 63 seconds out of the 398 minutes of the entire trilogy that women had a speaking role. And you fast forward 40 years and some change later, and it's General Leia. And it's at the time when I decided to write that chapter that we were up for a possible female president, up for a possible female Secretary of Defense, a female Northcom commander. And I thought, what an opportunity. It was the same time that one of the newer Star Wars had been released. And I really liked that Hollywood had kind of caught up, that we saw Princess Leia now is General Leia. So I think strategy itself, Steve and I share that kindred spirit bond of being a military strategist, as I would argue as the rest of those on the panel as well. This is STEAM panel. And I think strategy is really amplified in science fiction. And I think that's why strategy is in everything. I see it, and it's been really fun to be part of all three of these books. This one more so, no offense to the other two, but I've really enjoyed this one. I just the topics and it gave us we had a little bit more generality for this that we were able to look at. So I think, Steve, I mean, I could argue it's you and I know we have a couple other common authors here, but it's been a pleasure to be a collaboration with you.
Well, yeah, we're just getting warmed up too, because we already have another idea for the next one. And I can totally relate to the whole idea of reading science fiction on deployments, because I survived every deployment reading Star Trek novels because it was an escape. I didn't have to think. I knew who all the characters were. I knew what the hardware was. I could just settle in, read the story, and it was a perfect escape. And yeah, you just can't beat that. It beats the hell out of trying to read Clausewitz in the middle of a deployment. That's for sure. All right, so let's hop.
It's over also too late, Steve.
Let's hop over to Kira. Your chapter stood out to me for a lot of reasons, but it really got me to rewatch the Star Wars films through a different lens. Talk about what you wrote and what you did and what you think it brings to the audience.
All right, so my chapter, it's titled of X-Wings and Y-Wings, which every time I talk about on Twitter always brings in this just terrible canoe of everybody who wants to talk about X-Wings, Y-Wings, B-Wings, like you name it. And we never got to the point where anybody caught on to the fact that I wasn't talking about X-Wings and Y-Wings. I was talking about, are you XX, XY? So we were talking about men and women. Again, I'm using this sci-fi background that everybody has familiarity with. Like you said, you can sit down and it's comfortable and you know it, and then bringing them into this. And so I think Erica kind of already hit on this. So the first point I wanted to get to is I wanted to talk about General Organa, because I wanted that piece out there for every little girl that grew up thinking that I want to be a princess like Leia, and later on as an adult went, I want to be a general like Leia. So I just wanted to be able to bring that out because I just thought that was the coolest thing. But I think that aside, the biggest thing I wanted to bring out was to show the difference between the Empire and the Rebel Alliance. And I really narrowed the scope down. But I think that the biggest thing here was that if you look at the Empire, there was a whole, like, it was so whitewashed. It was so homogenous. Everything was the same. There was no diversity. And really, like, all you got was Caucasian humans. And I like the only example that I could really find in the Empire was Thrawn. And he really stands out, right? But when you start looking at the Rebels and the Rebel Alliance, they had to expand to everyone they could get to be able to fight their fight. And where you had on the Empire side, you had the Empire earlier on, you had the Clone Wars, and they're really nothing more than mercenaries, and they're out there. They don't represent the group that they are fighting for. Whereas on the Rebel Alliance, when you're pulling from everybody, I think like General Ryan said, you have to be representative of the force you're fighting for. And you are the representation then of their ideals, their goals, and their values. And all of that should sound really familiar because modern militaries, I know especially the American military, we should be representative of the nation that we're defending, and we should hold the values and ideals and goals of our nation. So I really liked that I got a chance to talk about some of that and weave it into almost a story, instead of having to sit there and say phrases like diversity, equity, and inclusion, which turns people's brains off in certain cases. So I think I really enjoyed being able to write that and bring that out to the audience, and hopefully then people reading it like you will now look at it through a somewhat different lens.
It's funny, what we've discussed since we submitted the manuscript was that the mark of a really good chapter is one that makes you either go back and reread something or rewatch something and look at it through a different lens. And you definitely achieved that. In fact, I think all of you did, to a great extent. And I would talk to the publisher and say, this is I haven't read a book other than science fiction in probably 6 months because I've been digging into what everybody wrote about to refresh my memory about what was happening in these books and these stories, and then think about them and reflect on them. And that's I think that's what will make this such a powerful medium. More so than probably a lot of other things that we've worked on in the past, because this really drives you to think and view things differently. And I'm not sure that was an intended consequence of the project, but it was definitely an outcome. All right, let's jump over to John. You contributed actually 2.5 chapters to the book. You wrote 2, and we co-wrote the 3rd one together. So let's talk about the quintessential Star Trek villain, Khan. And it's hard not to notice that you kind of look a little bit like Khan from the neck down tonight. I think you would have been better if you had worn a wig, but it is what it is. So why did you pick Khan, and what can we learn from Khan? And then the last part of this is, what makes Khan the go-to villain in the Star Trek universe?
Well, I think first off, any really great story has a great villain. If you don't have a great antagonist, you're probably not going to have a great story. So, and as a child, unusual, I was rooting for the bad guys. So, but before the great reveal of all time, I was like, yeah, cut his hand off, and then wait, no. But anyway, so you need that great villain. And you look at Star Wars, Darth Vader fills that role. He's arguably one of the greatest villains of all time. The black suit, the outfit, the James Earl Jones voice, he does it. And in Star Trek, I think you have to say it's Khan. I don't think it's an accident that Benedict Cumberbatch reprises it years later. I mean, you look, it's 1967 Space Seed, the first episode that Khan appears, and then he's again 1982. You see the Wrath of Khan, and as I mentioned, the 3rd movie. It's just gravitas of the character, the depth of background, the real thought process, and you can see someone, a real person with him. You can see a real motivations, and as I get into in the 1 chapter, you can see his descent. I mean, he starts off as a megalomaniac, but he gets worse, if you can believe it. So the other part of it is there's so much literary allusions built into the character. So if you look at in the Botany Bay, in the bookshelf, you can see the books, and one of the key one is Milton's Paradise Lost. It's often the cornerstone when we talk about English literature, if you're studying anything like that. So the notion of a satanic hero from Milton, I think, is so important. That whole idea of a character that has both virtue and villainy. So you have the ultimate villain in Satan, and you have Khan, who's modeled very much after Milton's Satan. So there's just so much going on. He's such a rich character. He's not a 2-dimensional cookie cutter, cowboy's white hat, cowboy's black hat kind of villain. So to me, it just spoke to me. And I mean, Sheldon even talks about him in The Big Bang Theory. You know, that's Will Wheaton. You know, Wheaton. I mean, there's just so many things built into it. So easy for me. He's the ultimate villain in my book.
So there was an interesting comment made over on Discord about that Khan is the ultimate sympathetic villain because Kirk did him wrong. And this is something that you and I discussed, oh God, I don't know, 9 months ago when we were reading the graphic novels. What do you think? What's your take on that, I guess?
Well, I think it's interesting. Again, what ends up happening to me is I'm supposed to be doing other work and I end up gravitating over to YouTube. I'll start wandering around and looking at different stuff. And it's interesting to see the theories that are out there on this. But in doing the prep work for that chapter, you had Space Seed, and then you had the as you mentioned, the graphic novel that fills in that gap when Khan is ruling after Kirk has exiled him. And then you have the movie. I think Kirk, had every intention of setting him up well, to colonize that. Better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. But nobody ever checked on him. And that's that interesting part of the graphic novel. So if there's a fault, I think it's for not going back and checking on Khan. And that's what Khan is so angry about. So I would agree with that portion, but I wouldn't go any further than that.
Oh, that's great. Hey, we're going to swing back over to Erica again. Hopefully her sound is working. So in your chapter, you give a strategist take on the final frontier by looking really hard at the future of space policy, which I got to admit, I thought that was going to be a really strange chapter given the subject matter, but your take on it was absolutely really good reading. And it wasn't, it didn't come across as like the typical strategist kind of writing that you'd read and go, oh my God, I can't believe I had to endure that. It was actually interesting. So can you talk about what you wrote and why that particular chapter mattered so much to you?
I would love to. And I guess for those inquiring, not an official astronaut outfit. Definitely not. It's not authenticated. But what I did write on, nor is my Occupies Mars my hat. What I did write on was the galactic price of space conflict. And it really came from a kind of an interest and passion in space. I ended up doing some time at the Army Space and Missile Defense Command. And I had to go through this grueling course of orbital mechanics and astronomical physics to get my space badge. And it gave me a little bit of a more appreciation for the science part of this science fiction. And as I started to kind of look at this, I took a different take on the chapter. I was originally going to write about the Forever War. Joe Haldeman wrote the Forever War about a 1,200-year space conflict, war in space. And he did it in a way that it was rational because he talked about the wormholes and using time dilation and space collapsers. And I had no idea what that meant. But doing a little bit digging into it, it made me, I ended up watching more and more space conflict movies. Just Interstellar taught me a little bit more about the Kessler syndrome and the chain of events that happens from a little piece of space debris. So what I found as I did this, it was just more and more research. And I am by no means, I'm by no means any space expert, but I did learn enough of the fun facts that make this a pretty interesting research project. And so I think what I talked about in the price of space conflict is I took how science fiction portrays space conflict. So you look at the spaceships and the little green men, the aliens that they fight. So all the Klingons and the Formics and the Cylons, and you look at who our real world enemies going to be, who we're going to look at, and what are we really going to look like? It's going to be non-kinetic. It's going to be personal and targeted, and it's going to be deliberate. It's going to be across all domains. So I had a lot of fun really kind of exploring that. And I think as we look at where space is going, there's a lot of shuns in space. And I kind of talk a little bit about the exploration and the weaponization, colonization, navigation, commercialization. And we're seeing I had originally planned to get a SpaceX outfit because I think there's a lot of private travel that they're exploring now. There's just so many ways that we can, we're looking at space, but the space policy, Steve, to your point, is a really big a way ahead. You know, the Netflix series Space Force was a satire, but what I think it did show, and I wasn't entirely a fan, but what I think it did show is that I think as we look at space weaponization, which is the scarier part of this, is the just a definition. What a communication satellite would be for one country could be a counter space capability or a threat by another. And until I think we get consensus on that, I think that's the scarier issue. And so space conflict, the science fiction versus the nonfiction, I argue that it's time to make space for space in mind. So I had a really interesting and fascinating time, and it gave me a good excuse through COVID to catch up and watch a lot of new genres out there on space, especially The Mandalorian. Great timing for all of that. And General Ryan, I really loved your analysis that you did. You did after every episode before you do it before I would watch it. The top three lessons learned from every Mandalorian episode. It was just great. So all great appreciation for in the love of the game. I have spoken.
So Mick, a significant part of who you are as a leader involves looking at conflict through the lens of the future. So as an idea guy, how do you take a project like this and leverage it in that capacity?
I've been doing futures stuff for a while now, probably since the early 2000s. And my original experience with this was very much mainstream futures, future concepts, experimentation. And what I found was you can get some buy-in, but it's actually really tough to get people to engage with the future. Our institutions are so busy, particularly in national capitals, in big headquarters. The business as usual, the requirements of secretaries and ministers always overwhelms thinking about, you know, what's over the next hill, what's in the next two bounds for your institution. So it occurred to me that, you know, you need to engage people differently. So when I took over the college 4 years ago, I instituted a sci-fi elective called the Perry Group, and it's a volunteer basis, and we spend about 6 months exploring science fiction, its history, but also how it can be used to think about the future. And that group writes a series of papers based on priority topics from our Chief of Defence. And this year they're writing narratives, and they're supported by a bunch of different Australian and overseas science fiction authors in that world building activity that goes into building these things. So for me, these kind of books are all about underpinning the capacity for people to be creative, underpinning our ability to engage senior leaders, but also more junior people in our institution. And finally, you know, I think a really important thing at an educational or a training institution is it should also be fun. Like, why can't learning be fun? It doesn't have to be the old shove training down your throat, develop muscle memory. There's a requirement for some of that. But if we want to develop a diverse group of people with a diverse range of ideas, you've actually got to allow them to enjoy themselves. And a spectacularly large proportion of our people actually read fiction, science fiction, and fantasy. Let's leverage that.
Oh, absolutely. You know, that's almost blasphemy in academia that you might actually have fun while you're learning. That really hits home. Kira, let's bounce back to you again. It was your idea to do this panel in cosplay, and everybody knows it, so you don't deny it. Something that I hope will always be remembered in the annals of NavyCon. But there's a lot more to you, and there's a lot more to what you brought to the table. So tell us about how you're attracted to science fiction, what role it plays in your life, and lastly, tell us what your favorite cosplay costume is.
Okay, great question. So I will answer the last question first. My favorite cosplay to do, obviously, is Wonder Woman. You know, you really can't deny the power of the Amazon. So that's definitely got to be one of my favorites. But as far as what draws me to sci-fi and the role that it played in my life, I think that it's always been there. So my father's really no longer part of my life, but he did have an impact early on because huge sci-fi nerd. Whenever the Next Generation was on, and all of the movies that came out when I was growing up, I watched them. I have to say that I have seen the Next Generation movie with the whales. No, I guess it's sorry, the original series with the whales, like way too many times. Like it's an embarrassing number of times because as a kid I loved whales. But I think the thing that really got me early on was going back to the original series. I loved Lieutenant Uhura. Um, as a child, here was this woman who was strong and she was poised, she was well respected, and she was just beautiful. So, she would come on screen and I just loved it. And so later, like later on growing up, I saw the broader impact that she had and what sci-fi could bring, both, kind of out in the world and then on me. And one of the things, like you learn about Nichelle Nichols and how she wanted to leave Star Trek initially, but she had a very special fan that told her, no, you can't leave. Like the broad impact that you have on the world, and that was Martin Luther King Jr. And so like you read about things like that, and that's the impact that sci-fi can have on the world. She also inspired Mae Jemison, so one of the first Black female astronaut for NASA, who was just like one of my idols growing up, to the point where my mom actually got me an autographed picture of her. And so to think that, like it's this very short chain of the impact of sci-fi of I was inspired by her. I wanted to become an astronaut. And so I joined the Air Force, and she was inspired by the character of Lieutenant Uhura on sci-fi. So you can really see that impact it has to me personally, and then on the world. And I think that's what I really love about sci-fi is just that broader impact.
I grew up doing the same kinds of things. Watched the television shows, read the stories, and I was probably the only kid in second grade who actually wore a Captain Kirk uniform shirt to school. Much to the embarrassment of my entire family, I didn't care. I thought it was cool. And there were actually 3 or 4 of us by the end of the year that wore the same thing to school, probably every day. Weird, but hey, we were kids. John, you rebel scum. That was a great chapter. You think I was going to insult you. So it's a really timely topic as we begin to cut sling load on the last of the Forever Wars. So can you talk about your chapter and why that idea still matters in the future? And lastly, have we seen the last of counterinsurgency?
Yeah, well, as you know, Steve, I worked on counterinsurgency doctrine for a while, so this was often on my mind. Worked on U.S. joint doctrine, U.S. service doctrine, and NATO doctrine, and that included talking to General Ryan's countryman Mark O'Neill and some other folks who he may know down there. But anyway, I think it all came from the old quote, "One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter," and that got me thinking. We often forget insurgency in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just a thing. The American Revolution, guess who the insurgents was? So, our British friends might feel differently about who's the good guy and the bad guy. But anyway, but science fiction is replete with rebels, and I wanted to use science fiction to explore some of the theory that I'd wrestled with and the history and so forth. So I ended up looking at I think some of the greatest space operas of all time: Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, and one of my favorites, Dune. You don't hear that mentioned quite as much as some of the others, but again, child of the 80s, I saw Star Wars, in the theater on the screen. To date myself, I still call it Star Wars. It's not A New Hope, because that was what was on the marquee. Thank you very much. Just like it's Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's not Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. No, not buying it. But I looked at the Star Wars series and looked at some of Mao's theories, talking about strategic defenses and the importance of bases, because I think you can look at the alliance really as an intergalactic insurgency from a certain point of view, and I don't think anybody had really wrestled with that, so I thought it was interesting. And it comes across when you read the original text crawl from the very first movie. If you'll bear with me, a period of civil war, rebel spaceships striking from a hidden base have won their first victory against the evil galactic empire. And then at the very end, pursued by the Empire's sinister agents, Princess Leia races home aboard her starship, custodian of the stolen plans that can save her people and restore freedom to the galaxy. It's insurgency. There's so much to look at it, and we often forget, insurgents don't necessarily have to all be guerrillas. There's a distinction there. So you can have conventional forces. To leap forward a little bit, Battlestar Galactica, I think that especially the 2003 version, that's an allegory for, as you said, Steve, the Forever Wars. So there's so many things wrestling with there, but I think what I tried to explore with that more than anything was the complexity. The Cylons weren't monolithic. The counterinsurgents weren't monolithic. You had different groups in both sides vying for different outcomes and angles. So again, those who've been there, Iraq and Afghanistan, you can't say the insurgency because there are multiple insurgencies and there are other actors of bad, middle, good, all that. So the last thing, I guess, is Dune. I explored kind of an older concept, but it was called prerequisites of insurgency. So vulnerable population, that was the Fremen, lack of government control by outsiders, and then leadership available for direction. So that's where Paul and Jessica Atreides come in from the outside and link in with the Fremen who are ready to fight against the outside oppressors. So I had a lot of fun with that, but fundamentally, insurgency is not going away. It's human nature. It's not going to go away. So the other thing that we forget is when we're in this era of great power competition and we talk about large-scale combat operations, and then we talk about irregular warfare, of which insurgency is a part of. No, it's a whole. You're going to have great power competition, potentially large-scale combat operations, and insurgency. So it's a false dichotomy, and I'll leave it at that.
Great. Hey, we have a couple of questions from the audience, but before we hit the first one, it's also almost 10:30. So, Mick, I'd like to thank you for being here for us, for being such a great sport. And I'm sorry I couldn't ask the question I had for you, which was, do toilets really flush backwards down under? I'll save that for the next time we have dinner, and you can explain the physics of that. But on behalf of everybody, I just want to thank you for taking the time to be here tonight.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks for to the other members of the panel, Kira, Erica, and John. It's been a real honour to be here with you, and thanks to the organisers of NavyCon for allowing us to participate again.
All right. Okay, so the first question from the audience is actually one that I know John and I have discussed in the past. And we talked about as a follow-on project, actually looking at fantasy, which we kind of touched on fantasy, some of us here, probably all of us here, with Winning Westeros, which was a fun project, but it also showed the limits of focusing only on a single theme within fantasy. So the question is, what works of fantasy are large enough in popular culture to be useful for a discussion of strategy, or due to their tech level, are they just not as useful for such discussions as sci-fi? I think you can actually do it, but what we never came to an agreement on was, once you get beyond the Lord of the Rings, which everybody knows, what's left? I'm going to throw this out to the panel.
If I can jump in, Steve, since we had this conversation, and then Erica, Puff, if you have, by all means. But you look at some of the other big ones, Wheel of Time, the Shannara series. I mean, there are other fantasy worlds, but they don't hold up as well there. I mean, I guess you could talk about Dragonlance or, you know, some of the other Dungeons and Dragons kind of novel series, but I think to address the second part of the question, I've always thought that at the strategic level, that's where technology matters the most. Operational level, it matters a little bit less. And at the strategic level, the technology is just something that you have to deal with. It's not as important. So what I'm driving at here is that's why there's still a lot of institutions, including this one, that one of the first things that we address with the students is Thucydides. Because again, strategy in a lot of ways is timeless. You know, again, it's human nature hasn't changed. Human politics, the nature of human, well, the specifics of human politics have changed, but the natures are still competing groups about who gets what when. I mean, fundamentally, that's politics. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Okay, if I can answer this. Sorry, it took a glance over at my bookshelf to come up with the right one, but I would say the Dragon Riders of Pern, and this is going to be a very Air Force answer, partially because you're looking at airborne forces countering an airborne foe, trying to halt it before it ever reaches the ground level. And while they do occasionally get into ground conflicts, it's people versus people, and it's very low level of technology. But the thing that I always found interesting, and I think that you could dig out a little bit. It might not be big enough for a large discussion, but the non-flying people, the different, not really nations, but sort of geographic areas, talking about, hey, why are we still supporting this force? Why are we still putting, essentially national blood and treasure towards supporting this flying force when for a while there, the main enemy, if you will, wasn't there. It had this long break. And I think that might have been a very good analogy for the post-Cold War phase where we had this big large military and people are wondering, why do we have all this blood and treasure? We don't have that existential threat anymore. So I think that might be one that you could kind of dig into and explore a little bit in sort of the civ-mil relationship and how much would the civilian populace really want to continue supporting against a sort of existential threat that may not even be there.
Erica, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I would only just 2 quick points. I would say I think what makes our discussions so vital and passion is that people really resonate. When you have something like Game of Thrones that has so many people that watch it, everyone has an opinion, and you tend by mere discussion of it, it brings in more people to follow. And I think that those because they're large, that I think helps make for our book that we wrote for Winning Westeros, I think we're able to resonate a little bit more with readers. But I would say, and not to plug August Cole because he's one of our authors, but I really loved Ghost Fleet, and especially Burn-In, the newest one, only because it's really more of it's a science, whatever genre it is, it's futuristic, but the tech that they use, you could read it and there's not a year, but it's just the way that they write it. I think that those are just what they bring and the research that I think of Burn-In. If you've read that, I was constantly going to the back of the book to just say, is this could this be feasible and what's that look like? So that's all I would offer on that. I think because our books are successful because the larger genres resonate with more people, for whatever that's worth.
Good. John, we got another question for you. Do you view Saw Gerrera as a terrorist? And follow on, do you think Mon Mothma viewed Saw Gerrera as a terrorist?
Yeah, I'm trying to reflect back on this because I might have seen that Star Wars movie in the basement of the American Embassy in Kabul. So forgive me if some of my memory is hazy, but there's terrorism comes down to is it a logic? Is it a means, or is it a greater logic? And what that drives at is because he used the word terrorist, right, in his question?
Yes.
Yeah. So is it that fundamentally comes down to, is it an insurgency using terrorism as a means in conjunction with other means, or is it kind of what we would talk about in the 80s and 90s movies, where it's just it's a political statement. And as I recall, that character was really more of an insurgent fighting against the empire and using potentially what you could call terrorism. But again, I'd have to go back and look at that, because that can be a very nuanced discussion, because if terrorists just want political change using the long-term thing, but when you start talking about insurgency, they have to do things like they want to provide governance, they want to control territory. It's several litmus tests, and if it doesn't fit several of those, then it's not an insurgency and it's something else. So I'd have to go back and look before I could really give a good answer to that. But I think probably more of an insurgency, maybe using terrorism.
Okay, we've got another question up that kind of derived off Puff's discussion of Nichelle Nichols and NASA. Fargo, I'd like you to jump on this one if you don't mind. How else do you think we can use sci-fi to recruit and motivate those next generations of diverse thinkers?
I saw that in the chat and loved it, simply because it's what I'm doing now in Army marketing. So Gen Z, just generational studies has been really fascinating. And what the Army has kind of done is really taken a look at the Marvel universe, the DC universe, superheroes call. And I would even look at Doctrine Man, who has a cape, right? The hero type is it actions to people. So what the Army marketing has done is our new campaign, What's Your Warrior? We just rolled out a campaign that features 12 missions of the Army, 12 different careers. And so we have like the Dragon Tamer. It's like the mythical quest of the aviator. It takes that level to fight a pilot. The Virus Hunter, there are microbiologists. The Thunder Maker is the missile defense. So we've kind of gone a little bit outside the triangle, in a way to really look at how Gen Z wants, and they know the Marvel superheroes. So you'll kind of see if you look at it, how Army marketing has done it. That's how we're looking to recruit that kind of diverse talent, the ones who have the critical skills that are needed. So in various forms. So that's a direct tie to the Army marketing in my world, at least.
That's terrific, and it's something that I've talked about a lot too. I think that the latest marketing campaign, I thought it was terrific, and the people who didn't like it were the people in the wrong generation.
Right.
Of course, it didn't appeal to them. They've already made that decision. They're already vested, or they've already moved on. We're not trying to recruit them. They were quite happy to see somebody eating C rations and saying they could be all they could be. That was good enough for them. But it's a different generation. You're aiming for a different population, and it's okay to do that and to move on from that. So does anybody else have anything else they want to add to that question? That's a great question. I would say that I touched on this in my I wrote a chapter that dealt with the beast, Beware the Beast Man, which focused on the things that Rod Serling experienced both as a World War II veteran and as a Jewish kid growing up in New York, where he dealt with anti-Semitism, and how that shaped who he was. And then he wrote the original screenplay for Planet of the Apes, and how much of that life experience he built into that. And those are the little kind of things that if you could talk about that it shows just the power of diversity in getting a message out, and how it can actually really motivate people to try something new. We're just looking at everybody's social media handles, making sure that everybody's up online and good to go. What are the panelists' social media handles? I'm at Doctrine Man, easy to find. John is at strategy_troll. Erica, I don't remember yours. And Puff, what was yours?
So my name is my full name, so it's just at Kara Rolson, no Puff in there, but at Kara Rolson for Twitter.
I actually had to look mine up. I should know it. Army Erica. Pretty easy.
That's why I couldn't find it today. All right. Well, I think we're just about out of time now. I don't really have any closing remarks other than to say to Corey and the team, hey, thanks so much for giving us this opportunity to speak tonight, to share our ideas and our thoughts. And hopefully we did something just a little bit stranger than you were expecting, so that you enjoyed it instead of just looking at us and saying, oh my God, there they are, just like, just vanilla people.
No, absolutely not, Steve. And quite frankly, I'm a little bit jealous of Puff's Jedi costume. As a fellow Sam's grad, Steve, you know that they like to call us Jedis, and so yep. I have wanted a Jedi cosplay for a long, long time. I don't know if I'll ever muster up the courage to pull the trigger on that, but I think it all looks great, and I know for a fact that our joint Geek of Staff, Eric Muirhead, is tremendously jealous of your cosplay, Steve. He's actually decked out right now in his. He was a backup moderator in case something went wrong, and so he decided in the middle of the PCS that he would keep out his Star Trek uniform so that he would have it available, complete with class ring, I might add. So Starfleet department. At Twitter, you can see pictures of Eric in full regalia there. It is quite the show. It is quite the show. But to everybody from the To Boldly Go panel, Steve, Puff, Erica, John, and to General Ryan, who has unfortunately left, thank you very much. To everyone out there who has stuck with us all night, thank you. The team here at NavyCon was proud to present this virtual conference, and we can't wait to continue this conversation on Discord. With that, I would like to wish everyone a good night, and we will see you around. Good night, and thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.